Welcome to Why I Left, a podcast exploring life-changing career moves. I'm your host, Brian Aquart. Join me as I chronicle real stories from real people about the bold decisions that transform their careers and lives. Let's dive in. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Why I Left. Today, we're diving deep with a changemaker in the ED&I space, leveraging her lived experiences and professional expertise to challenge norms and drive systemic change. Zhou Fang is the founder and principal practitioner of the Intersectional Group, a consulting firm that places the framework of intersectionality at the heart of its work. Based out of Portland, Oregon, Zhou has dedicated her career to helping organizations and individuals better understand the complexities of identity, equity, and systemic change. As an immigrant, entrepreneur, and advocate, Zhou brings unique perspectives drawn from her multicultural and multilingual background. Get ready for a powerful and thought-provoking conversation as we explore her story, her insights on intersectionality, and her advice for leaders and change makers alike. Let's go check it out. All right, welcome back. So our guest today is Zhou Fang. Zhou is the founder and principal practitioner of the Intersectional Group, LLC, a consulting firm that champions diversity, equity, and inclusion through the powerful lens of intersectionality. She's also the host of the Intersection podcast, the space where identity, personal journeys, and systematic challenges come to life. Zhou is not only a thought leader, but also an advocate for entrepreneurs and a change agent in social justice. Her recent work, the Pay Transparency Report, which I'm very interested in, underscores her dedication to creating equitable workplaces. We'll dive into her journey, her approach to intersectionality, and the transformative work she's doing in Portland and beyond. Let's welcome Zhou Fang to the show. Zhou, how you doing?
I'm good. Thank you, Brian. Good morning from Portland and good afternoon for the East Coast.
So before we really get into it, I want to give a quick shout out to Sandra Hunter for introducing us. She was a guest on the show. Great conversation. And I just love when the internet works in this beautiful way. You meet great people, and then now look at us. We end up on a podcast together. So thank you, Sandra, for connecting us. And Joe, I'm looking forward to chatting here.
Thanks. Thank you, Sandra. She's wonderful.
So before we can really get into some things, I would love to just hear a little bit about your professional journey in communications and really what led you into this field.
My background is communications. As you mentioned, I went to school for journalism in China. And then I went to grad school in the Midwest for mass communications and communication studies. I think how it led me to the field of consulting is in my practice and personal experience, I think communication is everything. Communication is key. If we cannot communicate well with and to our audience, be it a podcast listener or a client or a partner or collaborator, we just cannot do the job well as consultant and as people who help other people. So my communications background really kind of set the foundation for me today. And specifically, I was a communicator in technology, and that kind of makes things interesting because it's such a diverse world. And for me, English is not my first language. So I was able to kind of work my multicultural, multilingual background into my work in technology as well. And I think that's another factor that really helps me today is to bring that multilingual and multicultural lens into my work today in consulting.
I love that. And maybe can you share some pivotal moments that led to your passion for intersectionality and social justice?
My passion starts from social justice, and then that led me to the discovery of intersectionality. Dial back a little bit in 2018. So that's about 7 years ago.
I know. COVID brain for me, so I don't even know.
So back in 2018, right, I was still working in technology as an international worker. And at the time, I felt very isolated just because, as we mentioned, the world of technology is very diverse, which makes it very complicated and at times we see all these systemic isms or phobias, all kinds of kind of systemic issues coming up in technology world. And for me, as a woman of color and also as an immigrant from China, I felt very isolated and I didn't really have a tool to help myself out. I mean, at the time I was already in therapy, but still that's a very closed in space. It's like between you and your therapist. So a colleague and friend of mine who's also an immigrant, she was like, why don't you go talk about it? So I was like, what am I going to talk about it? I have nothing to talk about. And she's like, well, just go try it. So what I ended up doing is in the fall of 2018, I spoke at a local Women in Tech event and shared my experience with sexism as well as microaggression. And from that point, I realized, oh, I can talk about things and I do have a voice. And before that, up until that point, I was like, no one's going to listen to me. And also, I think as a woman, we always feel like you should keep it to yourself, like figure it out. So it was until that moment when I realized, oh, I have a voice and I really care about social justice and equity, equality, or the lack of it, right? That's why it's an issue. So yeah, that was the pivotal moment, if we call it a pivotal moment, for 2018.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love that you got a chance to experience that. And because one of the things you mentioned that really touches me is I didn't know I had a voice, right? And how many people are out there who may feel the same. And so you had that experience and kudos to your friend kind of pushing you a little bit, right?
Yes.
To find that voice. So I'm glad that you shared that. I'm sure people can connect with that as well. Part of the show, we love to talk about obviously these big career moves, right? So why people left. And so you were in this communications role. Ultimately, why did you leave this role to establish the Intersectional Group?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's complicated. It's also very simple. I want to say I never left communications. I feel I left a certain industry that is technology, but I never felt I left the field of communications. If anything, I feel I went further. And it was in January 2022, so like 3 years ago, I finally got my green card. And for folks who are unfamiliar with the immigration processes, for me, I basically transferred from my work visa, which is H-1B at the time. And then I was able to obtain my green card, which is permanent residency. So that gave me the right and privilege to start a business. I mean, a lot of folks probably didn't know if you didn't have certain status in the United States, it's incredibly difficult for someone to start a business, LLC, etc. But having a green card in January 2022 allowed me to do that. So that's from a legal and kind of a logical standpoint of view. And before that, I had already kind of been planning to do something on my own, but I just didn't have the proper paperwork to do it. And also at the time, I still had my job. And I mean, it wasn't very grand, but at the same time, it's a paycheck, right? Like it allowed me to have a stability in my life. So it was also kind of like, am I going to do this? But really at the time, when I got my green card, I had already been in the States for 12 years. And for me at that point, I feel like I got nothing to lose. And also, if not now, when? Really, it's that cliche kind of thought process is, well, you only live once. YOLO.
Might as well. I love it. I love it.
So I did
that.
it.
Can you share maybe, was there like a big challenge or realization you faced when making this shift, finally now starting your own thing?
It's a process for sure. Like I didn't have that realization overnight. So prior to I started Intersectional Group in 2022, I got acquainted to the concept and framework of intersectionality around 2019, 2020. And as we recall, that was when we have like a lot of social and political transitions And we kind of like crashed into a pandemic immediately during that time. And so with the social, political, and social justice movements happening at the same time, and also the backdrop at the time was, there was a lot of protests and demonstrations in Portland, Oregon for Black Lives Matter. And we saw a lot of people who we wouldn't see in the picture, like social justice movement picture, like white moms. They would be in the street, like in arms and protecting people of color behind them, demonstrating. And for me, that was a very powerful moment. And I started to think, what was it? And I think in early 2020, I started to learn about intersectionality from Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, who was the creator of the framework. And I was reading and watching her content and materials, and I was like, oh, that's what it is. It's intersectionality. So I started to learn more about intersectionality from end of 2019 and 2020, around that time. So by the time I started Intersectional Group, I felt like I had a good understanding of the framework already, and I was excited to use it in my work. And I still am. But over time, the realization and the learning really is intersectionality is a very complex framework. When it was created by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, it was mainly about gender and race, right? For Black women, it's so much harder for them to get what they deserve, like say in medical settings, in career development, socioeconomic status, etc. It's incredibly difficult. At the same time, the framework evolves, and I realize it's everything. Like if we think about kind of intersections, it's all interlinked and interconnected. So it's actually very, very complex and deep and rooted in our collective history and our systemic issues and all the racism, sexism, and all the phobias, etc. So in reality, as I use it, I learned that it's actually really hard for people to understand it. The word itself is really long. Intersectionality. A lot of people say international. It's hard. In short, my realization is this is not easy work. On top of diversity, equity, inclusion, cultural inclusivity, social justice, etc., all those words, they are just words if we don't understand them and practice them. And then you put intersectionality in it. So what I'm saying is, in order to practice intersectionality, the framework, and get to use it in our social justice work, we really need that curiosity and willingness to learn from our collective history and from our stories, because intersectionality is everywhere. And we have to look into our history and our stories and our ancestries to understand it. And intersectionality is not an isolated theory, because the word intersection means everything is intertwined. So every part of our history and society really do reflect some part and some form of intersectionality. So I think my biggest challenge is to say it's hard work. At the same time, with the help of communication and education, we can make it more accessible and available for everyone.
And when you think about it, like if someone who's a novice to this space were to ask you, how do you define intersectionality in your work? What would you give as the one-liner?
My one-liner would be, think about your identities. So when I try to explain intersectionality to people, I ask people, how do you see yourself as someone who embodies not only one, not only two, but multiple identities? And then you reflect on your identities and to think how it feels like to other people. And you will realize fairly quickly that we have, yes, different identities. At the same time, we have similar identities. And more often than not, we see our similarities more than differences when we reflect on our intersectional identities. So that's usually how I approach the teaching of intersectionality.
Now, in some of your work, what challenges do organizations face when addressing systemic inequities, and how do you help them navigate the space?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's a very hard one, not because it's hard to understand, but again, it's hard to practice. So when we talk about systemic inequities, I think oftentimes they are caused by fear and trauma. And everyone has fear and trauma. You don't have to be a person of color or a woman or a non-binary person to experience fear and trauma. So I want to really kind of call out fear and trauma are not, they're not a luxury for people from underrepresented groups. Fear and trauma is for every working person on this planet. And this fear and trauma specifically in the United States, these systemic inequities, these fear and trauma are caused, in my opinion, by colonialism and capitalism. And that affects everyone, including the colonizers, including people who practice capitalism, who are really kind of bought into this idea of colonialism and capitalism and benefited from it. And they're also traumatized by it. So one of the results of this kind of fear and trauma is the scarcity mindset. Because capitalism functions really well with the idea there's not enough, so we have to fight for resources. So over time, with generations and generations after that kind of operation, we are so used to, comfortable with, even though it makes us very uncomfortable, but we're comfortable with practicing the scarcity mindset. So to counter or to solve that problem or change that mindset, we need to foster an environment to practice the abundance mindset. So for me, I think to address systemic inequities, the abundance mindset will do wonders to organizations. And the abundance mindset, I want to call out, it doesn't mean that everyone has more and more and more. There is a line between abundance and greed. Abundance doesn't mean you are allowed to have more and more. It just means everyone has enough. We have enough resource. We have access to them. They are available to us. We don't need to fight for it. So that's the abundance mindset, basically. And of course, if we just ask people to practice it, it's not enough because we are so scared now. Everyone is afraid. Everyone is traumatized. So if we just ask someone in the street and say, you have enough, that's not going to work because they will say, no, I don't have enough. My paycheck does not allow me to put food on the table and I have to work 3 jobs to feed my children. So if you just tell people to practice the abundance mindset, people will just say like, you're crazy or like you are out of touch or you are disconnected or what kind of bubble do you live in? So I think really to address the scarcity mindset and systemic inequity, we have to heal and we have to restore together individually and collectively. And it is until when we heal and restore, we can actually really practice the abundant mindset, which will offset the scarcity mindset, which will help with the systemic inequity, which is really hard to do. It takes a long time. And I want to grab this little button I have on my desk. It says, let's heal intersectionally.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a little gift from my friend Sarah, and shout out to Sarah, a wonderful, creative, and very kind person. And she found it at a market in San Francisco, and she sent it to me. So that's what I believe in, is we need to heal and restore and practice abundance mindset. And then we can counter the scarcity mindset and systemic inequities.
You know, as I was looking into your background, I know you talk about how your experience as a Chinese immigrant has really shaped your perspective on equity and inclusion. And can you share maybe an example of how your lived experiences informs your work that you take with organizations and in your practice wherever you go?
So I didn't come to the US until when I was 22. So I grew up in China and became a young adult in China. So what I learned from our culture in China is there is a really big sense of collectivism. When we work together, we can solve a problem. And collectivism, this approach really helps with building communities. And it really helped me see the value of equity and inclusion. Because I think that's what's that about is we don't leave people behind. We don't leave people out. We make sure people are taken care of collectively. Being equitable and inclusive actually can propel us all, everyone included, forward instead of the selected few like elites. I think one thing that individualism really highlights is elitism. Only the selected few can excel or advance. But collectivism really allows me to see the value of equity and inclusion. And I will say another thing, growing up as a Chinese immigrant, well, as an adult in the US, is again using my communications background. I grew up speaking Chinese, Mandarin, and Cantonese. And now I mainly use English as my tool. So my background as a communicator and multilingual communicator really is the foundation of my work. It informs and guides me every day. And over time, this is a little bit more specific, is in order to bring people together using communications, we need to practice the yes and method. So I'm using air quotes here. So yes and. And yes means acknowledging and validating. It doesn't necessarily mean you agree with someone 100%. It only means, yes, I hear you. Yes, I see you. Yes, I received your message. So it means acknowledge and validate. And means having a conversation. So what happens after that acknowledgement? We don't just stop there, right? It's like, okay, I hear you. Can I also share my perspective? So yes, and I hear you, Brian. And may I share how I think about this, or may I share my story with you so that you can see from my perspective as well? So the yes and method in communications, I believe, allows us to have a conversation, having that sort of back and forth with someone, also encouraged by curiosity. Because with curiosity, we'll be able to ask questions and have follow-ups like, oh, the other day you talked about that, and I kept thinking about that. Can I have some questions with you? Would you like to spend 30 minutes with me and discuss this? So yeah, communications really inform and guide my work and my personal life every day.
I mentioned this in the beginning, this pay transparency report that you work on. I am so intrigued by this. So tell us about your research and findings in the pay transparency report for those who may not be familiar with it.
It's funny. I rolled out my sleeve. I'm ready to talk about pay transparency. It's truly my passion. It's like we have to care about pay and money, really. So I started doing the pay transparency project in late 2021 because I was going through some pay inequity, and because of the lack of transparency from workplace. And I learned, which at the time shocked me, is that a lot of people, like women and people of color, or people who are nice, quote unquote, people who don't ask questions, were paid much, much less than their counterparts. And when I saw the numbers, I was, of course, outraged, and I was very sad to see that, because it wasn't just me. it was half of the organization was like, oh my God, what were people getting paid with? And no one was talking about it. And I was like, well, as an individual, I could go out and fight for myself. Yes. However, going back to collectivism, what if it's something everyone can talk about? What if there was transparency? What if salary and pay and money wasn't a taboo anymore? So that was the question. I was like, then pay transparency would make sense. So I started doing pay transparency projects in late 2021, collecting data in community, etc. And then over time, we were able to expand our research to a bigger region. So I worked with a couple of like-minded experts, like analysts and people who are good with numbers and also good with writing reports. Well, at the time, AI wasn't a big thing. I mean, now everyone uses AI to put together reports. But over the years, we worked with people who are really good at this. So far, we produced 3 reports in the years of 2022, because 2021 was when we collected data. So we produced these reports in 2022, 2023, and last year, 2024. Our main findings are, number one, people, generally speaking, including white people, cisgender people, or male-identified people. People want pay transparency. It is a good thing, including people in management and leadership. Number 2, pay transparency really helps close the gender pay gap. Makes sense, right? Like when women are in the know, then we will be able to have a voice if we have the information. So pay transparency really helps close the gender pay gap. And number 3, pay transparency is not a phase. It's not like something that's trendy. Like it's not like that. It's not going away. Something that's spreading nationwide. We track legislation progresses in the US. And this year, we are actually going to update our legislation landscape in the US on pay transparency. And a quick fact here is in 2025 alone this year, we're only in January, so it can change, of course. We have 5 states in the United States that already did or are going to implement their own pay transparency laws. So at least 5 states so far. And I feel it's going to change as we go into the year as well.
I'm based in New York, and there's been some talk around that here too. And the past couple of years, around like salary transparency when it comes to job postings, you see more of that happening a bit more out in the open. I think orgs, had a certain amount of time before they had to start doing these things. But to your point around impacting the gender pay gap, all of those things, it can be helpful in people making these informed decisions. And to your point about the piece specifically around gender, keep me honest. I think the last time I read the reports, what's it, 83 cents? Women's
something like that.
Yeah, it's like 83 cents to the man's dollar, something like that.
Yeah. And that's in general, right? It's like all women. But if you break down like white woman, Asian woman, black woman, Latinx, and indigenous, like it gets darker and darker.
I can imagine. Yes, I could imagine. And so this work that you're doing now, I would imagine is going to have this impact on legislation, right? And so how can what you're doing in this space with this project influence legislation around pay transparency to really impact workplace equity?
I think the impact is very direct and it's very practical as well. I think this kind of legislation around pay transparency, every state has their own laws, of course, but they all have similarities. So generally speaking, pay transparency legislation provides a guideline for companies to follow. For example, when companies are required to disclose the salary information during the hiring process or their internal promotions, existing employees and their colleagues will also be in the know, right? Like you posted a job and someone in the company also has the job, then they will be able to see, oh, that's the current salary now, and I will be able to advocate for myself and also get that pay, assuming the a new job posting is usually the salary is higher than the existing one due to cost of living and fluctuation of market value, etc. So that's one. And also when it comes to internal promotions, oftentimes companies don't have to post that on job board, right? Usually announced internally. So if someone is being promoted inside the company, and if their peers and colleagues can know that information, then they also will be able to have that information and they can decide for themselves, like, oh, do I also want to get a promotion, or do I want to kind of look at my job description and look at my title? Am I doing similar things to this person? If so, should I also get a raise? So like you mentioned, Brian, like people can make an informed decision based on that information, which is really good. And also talking about gender pay gap. And this is not to anyone's fault. This is sort of like a behavioral pattern, is because boys and girls in a binary world, woman and man, we were raised differently. And I think for men, it's much easier to ask for what folks want, right? It's like if you're a man, you want a raise, you walk into the office and say, I want a raise, and you get it, walk out the door. And for women, myself as an example, every time if I were to ask for a raise, I think about it for like a week and I cannot sleep. And it'll be like, can I ask this? Can I not ask for this? What's the consequences? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like all the possibilities. And then you walk in the door, you're all nervous, you ask for a raise. And oftentimes you don't get it because it's much less likely for women to get a proper raise than men. So that's a reality. But with pay transparency, we eliminate that kind of struggle for women. So women can see that information and say, am I making the same money as my counterpart? Or is this new hire making more than me, even though they are actually more junior? So for everyone in the company, they have that information and they can make a decision for themselves. And it really reduces the chances or the room for mistrust and unnecessary guesses. And over time, it does save money for the company because HR costs money and time and energy. So it's actually a win-win for everyone. And of course, pay transparency also allows candidates to apply for jobs that are aligned with their career interests and their goals. Like say, I want to be making $200K in 3 years. So right now, I need to at least make $70K, for example, if I want to get there, or 100 even. But if this job I'm applying for only pays $50K, for example, and I didn't know that. So there's no way I'll be able to reach 200 in 3 years. And it wouldn't allow me to reach my life goal, really, without that information. So pay transparency also allows people to better plan their life and their career goals, etc. And it also reduces, of course, pay disparities due to discrimination. Like when we talk about gender, we also talk about ability status. If you are someone with disability, are you getting paid equitably? If you are a parent, are you getting paid equitably? So it reduces pay disparities due to discriminations as well.
Now I want to pivot into your podcast. So you're a part of the podcast tribe as well, and which I love, right? And you have a show called the Intersection Podcast. So I have an idea of what inspired you to start the Intersection Podcast, but tell us a little bit about, your show, what led to it, and how it's going so far.
I'm going to guess your idea probably isn't the answer.
Okay.
The Intersection Podcast started as a joke.
I would not have guessed that. I would not have guessed that. You're right. Absolutely right.
It is so interesting. Again, it goes back to the do I have a voice thing. And that means, behavior change takes time. My friend Dee, who lives in California now, by the time she was in Portland, my friend Dee suggested, like back in the summer of 2021 or 2022, around that time. And she was like, let's start a podcast. And I remember myself saying, everyone has a podcast. Why would I do that? No, thank you. And she said something like, well, it would just be for us. We can just have fun with it. Why not? It's just a game. It's a fun thing to have for ourselves. And I was like, okay, why not? So before the intersection, it was called From the Roundabout, like a traffic roundabout.
Oh, okay.
So before the intersection is in the intersection, it was called From the Roundabout, and Dee and I were co-hosts. And then because of like moving and transitioning in life, career, etc., over time, it became the intersection and I'm the host. But when we started doing it, we were really just kind of like playing with it. We had our dogs on the show. We had our friends on the show. It was much a side project. So yeah, it started as a joke. And then over time, especially since it became the intersection and I have the kind of the ownership of it to say, although I will always remember Dee was my partner in this. Without her, I would have never started this. So over time, I learned that I really enjoy sharing people's intersectional stories. I love it. Every time someone shares with me and the audience their stories, it's such a gift. It's a generosity. And people give their time and people shares a piece of them with you and the world. It's a gift. So I really enjoy sharing intersectional stories. And I'm actually pretty good at asking questions because I'm just very curious. I want to know. When someone says something, I always like, I have a follow-up question. So because of that, it's become a thing. And the intersection lives on the internet now.
I love that. And, you said something that really touches me too, in that, I also am so appreciative of folks like yourself who share their time with me, their energy with me, and their stories with me. And especially the topic that I'm talking about, this can get a little, like moving from a job can raise up feelings that can go either way. And so when people agree to come on the show, I'm just very appreciative because, like you mentioned, that generosity and all of that. The topic that you're talking about, intersection, I'm sure there's this storytelling role in this that's helping to drive awareness and action in equity and inclusion. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how, when you bring folks on to talk about their own intersection stories, how that's continuing to drive this conversation around intersectionality forward?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And storytelling, again, is a form of communications. And it's very close to me. And I'm sure it's close to people who really care about just living a life, really. Without stories, we don't have a lot going on with our story, I feel. And the way, storytelling drives awareness and action, hopefully, beyond awareness in equity and inclusion, is that I believe story is one of those accessible and approachable ways to draw attention and to make people feel like when you hear a really good story, a compelling story, you have these goosebumps. You feel like, like you have this kind of like shiver even sometimes when it's a good story. I think storytelling has a unique way to draw people's attention and make people feel, think, reflect, and hopefully act on it. Storytelling is an ancient way, really, to pass information and to teach. If we think about our ancestors, right? Think about our grandparents, think about a family tree, think about your family book that's like probably, 800 pages big. And think about our parents, think about our aunties and uncles and our community librarians. Think about those people. Those are storytellers. And that's how we learn over time, especially as a children. I think that's how I grew up, at least, is to find the truth from the stories. And it's readily available. Think about your libraries in your city, in your town, in your community, in your neighborhood. You literally walk in, you put down your name, you can borrow a book. It's free. It's readily available. And there's story time at libraries. There's community events at libraries or at schools or culture, museum, for example. Those are mostly readily available and very accessible. And that's a fancy way to say a lot of them are free.
Yes. Beautiful.
You don't need to pay a college tuition to hear a story. You don't need student loan in order to learn. Really. So in the work of equity and inclusion, I think accessibility and comprehensibility are so important, which makes storytelling kind of an ideal tool to drive awareness and action in this line of work.
I've really enjoyed this discussion. And I think a big part of the show that gets a lot of traction is really around advice for others. What advice would you give to leaders who are really striving to integrate equity, diversity, and inclusion into their organizations authentically?
Authenticity starts from within, right? That's basic definition. It's be authentic, be yourself. But how? It starts from within. That's what I believe. Authenticity starts from within. A person has to want to, again, it's that willingness, right? The curiosity to integrate equity, inclusion, and diversity into your organization. And better yet, you have to be committed to integrating equity, diversity, and inclusion into your organization and your life. Without living, there's no working, I want to call out. Like, you need to be able to do that in your life before you can do that in your organization. Like, we are a living person before we are a working person. So we need to be able to commit that diversity, equity, and inclusion is part of your life. The work starts from you. The work starts from everyone. And only when you have that realization, you can start showing up authentically and say, I do want to be equitable. I do embrace diversity. I do want to be inclusive, and I'm going to learn. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm still going to show up, and I'm going to bring that commitment and willingness and that humility and curiosity into my organization and my life.
I love that. And now, what advice would you give to empower maybe future entrepreneurs, particularly from marginalized or underserved backgrounds?
Our voices matter. We do have a voice, for one. And two, our voices do matter. I would like to think my journey in this line of work, it did start from that little talk in 2018 at a Women in Tech event. That's the first time I tasted what it felt like to have a voice. Thanks to my friend, Nikki, she just had her baby. And I'm very grateful for her advice and believing that I do have a voice. So our voices matter. And I don't want to sugarcoat it. It's hard. It's undoubtedly true that our journey as entrepreneurs, meaning people from underrepresented groups, people who historically are traumatized and marginalized in the society. It's really hard. Our journey is hard as entrepreneurs, and it is harder than people who conventionally, quote unquote, had it easy. But I want to say no one's journey is really easy. Even for people who look like they had it all and had it easy, everyone's struggle is different. So I want to make sure that's clear. That goes back to when we talk about the fear and trauma that caused systemic inequities. Everyone is fearful and traumatized. So no one really had it easy. But on paper or in reality as well, our struggles and challenges are different. And oftentimes they put us at a really tough spot, which can lead us to believe that we don't have a voice. We don't matter. I mean, the message really is if you don't have a voice, you don't matter. Like, you don't even exist. So for entrepreneurs from marginalized backgrounds, there are 3 things that I think are very important for us to remember, which will allow us to continue to have a voice. Is one is community. We cannot thrive and carry on the work without our community. Find your community, build your community, foster your community, and show up in your community. And your community will hold you. Even if you fall, your community will be able to catch you. So that's 1. And 2 is hope. As entrepreneurs and leaders from marginalized groups, it's fairly easy to feel cynical sometimes. Like I myself fall into that trap. Sometimes it doesn't matter.
Right.
But hope is so important. So we have to keep hope close to our heart. And number 3 is joy. I was just watching Inside Out 2 last night.
Great movie.
Joy! Oh my God! Joy is not everything, I want to say. But without joy, there's not much going on. We are not in a very peaceful time. Like, it's not a peaceful time. So how can we stay hopeful and stay in community is to believe that joy can happen even in the darkest times. If this is advice for entrepreneurs out there, is to remember we have a voice, and 2, to always keep our community, our hope for humanity, and our joy for ourselves and our community close in our heart.
I love that. That was beautiful. When you think about the impact that you are personally hoping to have in the future, what does that look like for you?
It's very simple and it's very hard. And it took me a long time to get to the point where I feel like this is what I want to do, is to continue to bring joy and hope to my community and to other communities. And I don't say that to make myself like a better person. I'm not better. Like there are plenty of times I feel like, oh, I gotta give up. I don't want to do this anymore. And that is anxiety. If you watch Inside Out 2. Yes. So when I feel anxious or feel scared about the future, what we are heading into, is, we cannot lose sight of hope and joy. And I know it is a privilege to say that. A lot of people are at a place where they cannot see a way out. They cannot see hope and joy. They don't think it's an option for them. And I want to be that person to remind folks, when you have those thoughts, it's okay. Those thoughts are real. Those emotions are real. And also believe at the same time, those anxiety and depression and fear and trauma, we can tell them that that's not eternity. They're not going to be there forever. Joy and hope are available to us and to our community members. So I want to continue to do that, to be the reminder of hope and joy to our communities and to the world that has been so deeply wounded and traumatized collectively, really. So that's my hope.
Now, I want to flip the mic to you as a also podcast host. So what's one question you have for me that I can hopefully answer?
I thought about that. And I don't want to make it too hard for you, but I also want to make you think. So how are you doing as a senior executive in the corporate world and a sophisticated independent podcast host and producer at the same time? And I ask how means in both in the senses of how you do it and how are you doing as a person?
Great question. So I will start by saying that whether it's a gift or a curse, I don't know, but I am hyper organized. And yes, as you can attest to, right? I am hyper organized. So when it comes to the work that I lead in my organization, thankfully, I have a great team of people that I partner with, right? Even though I'm like a department of one, if you will, I work very well cross-functionally. And so I have team members and other colleagues who help me push forward a lot of the education work that I'm involved with in the org. And I'll be honest, I couldn't do what I do at the organization without folks like the Michelles, the Stacys, the Kaylas, the Rakai. Like these women are helping me so much in pushing things forward. I love it, right? So that's one piece. I got a great team of people that I partner with in the organization. And I'm hyper focused and hyper organized with things so that in the initiatives that I lead, what's funny, I was on a call the other day. You know, we have a big internship program that's coming up that I'm just now getting back together. And it's like I partner with so many people across the system. I need to come in with a plan that you then opine on, as opposed to me coming into a space and saying, hey, what do you think? I want to come in with something. Like at least I started something here. Here's my thought process. And then you pick it apart from there. Then with the show, as you can attest to, the flow for this show, because to our earlier points around, I'm very appreciative of your time. I'm appreciative that you're interested in this topic. I try to approach these relationships, like with that intro call, the first time you've ever met me, right? I want to come correct in that call and say, hey, here's a little bit about me. Here's my background. And let me tell you why I want to talk to you. And here's then the flow that we have. So now that we're in season 4 now, it's like riding a bike. I've come into this. I put in a lot of work up front. And then now it's okay, here's what it's about. And what also helps, and of course, I'll be asking, folks who are on this season as well, testimonials are important. So if you say, hey, you know what? My experience with Brian was a good one. Here's why. That makes my life so much easier. And the key to this podcast game, as you know, is like relationships. Yeah, some content stuff here and there, but like the relationships. Think about what Sandra did for me now. I don't know if you know some of the other people, but Sandra has actually connected me with 3 people who are on this season. That's huge. And so you talk about the relationships that you build, the people that you meet online. They know I'm coming correct. I'm very obviously passionate about this topic. And so that's how I really manage and balance the work I do in healthcare and the work I do on the show. I got great people who support in a variety of spaces the work that I do. And of course, I'm also trying to enhance the visibility on my own as well. So push from me, a lot of help from others. But great question.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to say the fact that relationships, right? The connections, the network, and the referrals, for example, from Sandra, I think it is actually a real life example of practicing the abundance mindset.
Great point. Yes, you are right.
No one is hoarding this resource. It's available to all, but we need to practice that together in order to reach that abundance.
I love that connection, right? And that then builds on to your point earlier around community, right? Us building the community in this space. So yeah, no, I love that. Yeah. You hit me there. So I'm just like, yes, that is so true. So true. Joe, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show today. Obviously, the huge shout out to Sandra for connecting us, right? Learning your story has been great. I love the work that you're doing. Obviously, you have nerded out on the paid transparency project. And so continue to do that. We'll definitely highlight that in our show notes too. But where can listeners find you and support the work that you're doing? Thank
you for allowing me to be here and sharing my journey a little bit with you and your audience, Brian. I really appreciate that. And thanks to Sandra, a wonderful person. To connect with me or work with me, please go to intersectional.group. So it's intersectional.group. And also people can email me at Zhou, ZHOU at intersectional.group. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. My name is Zhou Fang there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And look, that'll do it for today's episode. Again, I want to thank Zhou Fang for joining me today. I'll be sure to share all of her information in the show notes. So I hope you all have a great week. You picked up something from this conversation, and we'll definitely see you next time. Zhou, thanks again.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Why I Left. Join us next time for more inspiring stories about growth, resilience, and transformation. Visit us online at www.whyiLeft.co. That's whyiLeft.co. And subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the Alive Podcast Network. See you soon.